Atlantic profiled various underground activist groups who have been providing reproductive health and access to reproductive health to women who live in parts of the country where, even before we found out what the Supreme Court is likely to do in June, we're dealing with severe restrictions to their reproductive rights. They didn't have access to abortion clinics. There were certain regulations that made it an undue burden. And so these activist groups really got involved and decided, listen, we gotta make sure we strategize. We gotta make sure that we have our bases covered. And I wanna share their stories with you because I think there's something we can learn here. And I really think that if we just focus solely on what we can do with electoral politics, we'd be losing. We need to empower groups like this. We need to form groups like this on our own. Again, to look out for members of our own communities, to look out for people who will be devastated by the decisions that will be handed down by this right-wing conservative Supreme Court. So the piece titled "The Future of Abortion in Post-Roe America" is written by Jessica Bruder. It's an excellent piece, a lengthy piece, but it profiles so many important stories. She writes, below the grassroots is the underground, a small network of community providers who connect with abortion seekers by word of mouth. This network too is growing. Its ranks include midwives, herbalists, doulas, and educators. When necessary, they are often willing to work around the law. And it's really interesting because they find loopholes in the law. They find ways to kind of mitigate the damage done by some of these laws or just, again, work around it. When abortion wasn't legal through Roe yet, abortion providers would use a device known as the Del-M. And it's also known as a menstrual extraction device because it can be used to pass an entire period all at once rather than over several days, which is fascinating. I didn't know that it was used for that. But since it's referred to as a menstrual extraction device, even during an era when reproductive rights had more protection in this country, there were providers, there were these underground activists who would honestly teach women how to use this device, how to use it safely. It never went away. Even after Roe v. Wade, this device and its use didn't go away. And it's because women wanted to have full autonomy. They wanted to be able to make the decisions regardless of what state they lived in, regardless of what laws were on the books. And it was, again, part of this desire for them to maintain control over their bodies. Plus, for much of the country, again, abortion was already severely restricted. Nearly 90% of US counties lack a clinic that offers abortions. States have passed more than 1,300 restrictions on abortion since it was made a constitutional right. For people struggling to get by, those restrictions can be insurmountable. Obtaining an abortion often means traveling long distances, which also means finding money for transportation, lodging, and childcare, not to mention taking time off from work. In fact, in some states, people may pay or may reach a clinic only to learn that they are legally required to make 2 visits, one for counseling, the second one for the abortion, which a mandatory waiting period of up to 3 days in between, or with a mandatory waiting period for up to 3 days in between. So the cost of an in-clinic abortion ranges from about $500 in the first trimester to more than $1,000 if the pregnancy is further along. That expense, by the way, as we know, is ineligible for federal funding under a long-standing restriction called the Hyde Amendment. Now, what are these underground activists doing? I think their stories are pretty inspiring because, again, we can learn something from what they're doing. We could expand on it to make sure that more women have these rights, they have these protections. There's a network of self-described community providers, a term for people who perform abortions and offer other reproductive health care services outside the medical system. Before the coronavirus pandemic, she traveled and taught in-person workshops throughout the United States and Canada. She now teaches online. Ellie learned to build a Del-M in one of her classes. So they're having these classes where they literally teach women how to safely use this device and give themselves an abortion. Look, honestly, all of it makes me feel sick to my stomach because there was a day in America when, and I'm sure that day still exists, I'm sure there are still women who die from trying to do an abortion on their own. But I mean, back in the day, women were using wire coat hangers, killing themselves that way because they were so desperate to get an abortion. There were women who were literally injecting themselves with Lysol and other chemicals to abort the fetus. The right to an abortion might go away. The need for abortions will not go away, and women will take matters into their own hands. So these activist groups are just trying to mitigate the damage by educating women on how to do this, how to do it safely. It's heartbreaking, but that's the reality. Community providers have talked about stockpiling such supplies in case Roe falls. This was, by the way, published before we learned about SCOTUS's draft opinion. Ellie has coined a term for people who share that outlook: vaginal preppers. A nonprofit called Abortion Delivered is planning to deploy mobile abortion vans. The van is being bulletproofed. These women are incredible, by the way. It would then be retrofitted with an ultrasound machine and a gynecological exam table, so a doctor with a manual vacuum aspiration device could perform first trimester abortions inside. Abortion Delivered, which originated in Minnesota, planned to dispatch the van and a second one stocked with abortion pills to just outside the Texas border. And we have other examples. In fact, since that last graphic mentioned abortion pills, let's talk about how outlawing abortion in this era will be different from the previous era, prior to Roe v. Wade. Abortion pills, they're known as Miffy and Miso, are remarkably effective and medically safer than acetaminophen and Viagra. They're FDA approved for ending pregnancies up to 10 weeks gestation. So in December, when the Supreme Court heard oral arguments in Dobbs, post-Roe prepping intensified. Volunteers across the country handed out thousands of boxes labeled abortion pills. Rather than actual medication though, they contained cards with a link to shareabortionpill.info. Let me repeat that again, shareabortionpill.info. A website that does what the name suggests. The pro-pill message was amplified with posters, yard signs, stencils, a mural, a digital billboard truck, and a plane towing a banner over Arizona. And then there's one final thing, and this is what really, really interests me. This is something that if TYT Army can organize around and actually execute and expand on, it would be a dream. Because this is, I think, the best workaround. The founder of Aid Access is Rebecca Gompertz, a physician who first gained prominence for creating the organization Women on Waves, which sailed to countries where abortion was illegal, picked up patients, then administered abortion pills in international waters. Similar methods, floating clinics in the Gulf of Mexico's federal waters, a cruise ship turned clinic anchored outside US jurisdiction, are on the minds of American activists. If we're gonna sit around and expect Democrats to save us, we're sadly mistaken. That is the most naive and foolishly optimistic way of looking at where we're at in this country. We need to take matters into our own hands. We need to have conversations, not just with like-minded individuals, but individuals who are apolitical, people who might lean right, have calm, constructive discussions with them, because they're not hearing your side of the story. They're not hearing the truth. All they're hearing is fear-mongering and garbage disinformation in right-wing media. But we also need to figure out ways to help support these particular organizations, or we could even be founders of our own organizations that help to fundraise, to provide these resources and these services to women. Now, there have been so many incredible women already who have been sharing resources on social media. There was one document that was shared that I found particularly helpful, and I want to draw attention to it. We've posted it on our website. So if you just go to tyt.com/mybodymychoice, again, that's tyt.com/mybodymychoice. You can learn about all these various resources and the organizations that you can support. Do not give money to the Democratic Party. If there is a specific progressive lawmaker who's an actual fighter that you want to support, that's something entirely different. If you're giving money to the DCCC, you are wasting your resources. Don't do it. They didn't fight for you. And the reason why they're not fighting for you right now is because they love what's happening. They're fundraising. They raised $12 million yesterday. They don't deserve it. They're not fighters. Democratic leadership is not worth it. They don't deserve it. The organizations who are honestly, in some cases, risking their lives to provide reproductive health access to women, those are the real heroes. Let's support them. Let's support their organizations. Let's support one another. Let's organize our workplaces. That's the only real hope. And my dream is at some point, we organize to a point where we could apply significant pressure from the outside to essentially make all of these feckless members of Congress bend to our will. Because if you don't force these issues, they're not gonna fight for you. There are too many incentives that work against us.